Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by someone I personally know, someone that I worked alongside, and then I worked under as a supervisor. He was my boss for a number of times, I want to say on and off, and truly a leader in the region for policing, and in a lot of ways a mentor to me. So without further ado, welcome DC Deputy Chief Bobby Hollis.
Thanks very much, Eric. I'm happy to be here and to expound whatever I can to all your thousands of adoring fans.
Yeah,
Millions
so
of
many,
adoring fans.
just all the masses out there, man. It's probably really helpful that we are recording remotely from undisclosed locations, or else there'd probably be just mobs of people outside. We wouldn't be able to talk. It'd be a whole thing.
It's madness. It's madness. Having to change
Mm-hmm.
names and everything, it's just crazy.
Yeah. It's I'm glad we don't have to do that. I'm so grateful now. So grateful. Well, thank you for coming on. I'm excited. This is probably, I feel like, a long time coming, just kind of reaching out and getting you on the show. I'm excited for several reasons. One is that I did work directly with you for quite a number of years, and you did leave. You did quit me in my agency, not our agency. No, but I love to look at different people's careers as they grew. You worked for a couple different agencies, and you'll get to that. But just as far as story and leadership and our culture, I feel that and it may come up, although we didn't always see eye to eye, as you being my boss, but to look back so many years later and reflect on my own personal growth and maybe career maturity, seeing how, and I will say many times I can look back to the specific examples and be like, he was right. But also, some parts where I'm like, well, I don't really like how that went, but that's okay, because I think because of how you interacted and how you led, that helps me reflect on some of the things I continue to do as a leader, which makes it about values and intent rather than whether you make people happy. And I hope, as I make decisions, and some unpopular, as any leader will, and will continue to do so, that's the kind of thing I think about.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I do appreciate that. One of the things that I try and, as you move up in rank, you are kind of set with a bunch of different responsibilities, right? And I do my best to try and understand and explain. And sometimes it's easier for me because at the end of the day, I've been a sergeant or I've been an officer and I've been in your shoes. And so when, back in the day when I was having things that maybe weren't, what I wanted to hear from a supervisor or a leader, now that I'm kind of moved up in the world, so to speak, I kind of go, oh, there was a piece of the pie or a piece of the picture that I wasn't understanding. And I do try and give people a lot of grace, right? Because, how I grew up or how I got to this place is not the same as other people's stories. And it's very important for me to recognize where a person is. And I try and meet people where they're at. So, I don't want people to be clones of me. That would not be any fun.
It'd be creepy.
And yeah, very creepy. But my intent is always to try and figure out, how I'm, who the other person is that I'm talking to, right? And I do try and spend more time listening to the person than talking. I mean, there's time for talk, there's time for chit chat, but I know part of my style is to be more of a listener in the first place anyways. But yeah, I appreciate the kind words. I would like to think that I'm trying to do things the right way. There's still a lot that I don't know, and I try and learn and practice even in my current position, right? There's still a lot that I don't know, and it's still a lot that I'm learning. So
Yeah, absolutely. And you summarized a lot of what I think about when I think about you and leaders like yourself. And if I was to distill them down, some of what you said and some of what I would have come into the conversation with is that openness and that sense of showing up.
Hmm.
And oftentimes, and I forget who I just said had this conversation with at work, but talk about leadership, and it's really simple. Like the bare bones are so simple, but then where it gets complicated are the situations and the people and the emotions. And but ultimately, when you just break it back down, it's about being open. You know, you're working for your people as much as they're working for you. You have a role, but also like you mentioned, learning. And I think about you as that perpetual student where, shoot, I mean, even just to give an example, when you took over supervising canine, you didn't work as a canine handler. You're our canine sergeant, and you would check in, you'd show up, and you'd ask a lot of questions, like tons of questions, because you're like, hey, like, not only did I not work this role, but kind of scared of dogs, you know? And so that's fair. Like these are kind of intimidating to be around, you know, especially for people that weren't around dogs a whole lot. So I just think that is one example of many where we can show up in that way. And I think that is one thing that I'm excited about is talking about leadership and talking about some of the challenges of first line leadership, some of the challenges of mid management, you know, kind of being in the middle as I'm experiencing now. And then maybe we'll get to your reflections of being in executive command, right? The senior leadership. Because although if you asked me when I started this podcast, I would say no, the main audience is kind of your line level. It's just the, you know, cops kind of thing. But if I take a second, I am constantly talking about leadership and culture because I truly believe those listening are already leaders. They're leaders in the making. They are line level leaders. Maybe they're first lines, maybe they're command staff. But the point is, we're all having these conversations and exposing ourselves to new ideas so that we can show up better for our teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important too that when you're talking about leadership with folks that even if they're just getting their foot in the door, that they have something to strive for, right? You know, you sometimes can identify traits because it's not necessarily a thing that you'll be able to learn, but it's something that some people just based off of values, you can see them, hey, you know what? I can see you as a sergeant, or I can see you as a commander, or I can see you as a police chief, or I can see you as a sheriff, right? Um, being able to plant those seeds with folks is important, whether they're 1 year on the job or 20 years on the job. Sometimes people just don't realize, oh, there's something else that I can do, and I've been pretty fortunate that in this career of mine, I've been in this business 24-ish years now. Um, there's been a lot of people that I've worked with that have like, hey, Bobby, you should think about management. You should think about moving up. And, when I first got in the job, it's like I was excited just to do the job. I
Hmm.
can, it's like working on a team. I love the team atmosphere. I love working either swings or nights throughout most of my career. And I never really thought about promoting up because I just wanted to do the job. I just thought, oh, this is a great job. I'm having fun. Um, but really, and then I never understood why people said those things to me in the first place. And then once I started testing and I did get my sergeant stripes, it's like, oh, I guess I understand why. Maybe I saw the world a little bit different, or maybe how I approached people was just different, where people thought, okay, well, I see some leadership traits in you. And then over the years, obviously, I've been able to kind of continue to work on those traits and work on those things to get me to where I am now. And now a lot of my job is passing on what I know to others that will end up replacing me, right? And but it's been definitely an interesting journey, just from getting your foot in the door to where I am now, because I would have never thought 24 years ago when I first started that I would be here now. I just thought, oh yeah, I love being an officer. It's great fun. I enjoyed the not knowing what's going to happen on the course of a day to day. And now I'm stuck behind a desk where most of my days are meetings, 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 meetings.
Hmm.
But even in this aspect now, I'm still learning different things, right? managing people, it's managing projects, it's passing on that knowledge. Here at my agency, we're working on we're replacing our commanders and we're replacing them with lieutenants. And so the lieutenant rank here is a rank that we haven't had in quite some time. And so uh, helping work with our two newly promoted lieutenants, just trying to help them work through the position because they have a chance to kind of mold the position to see how it will work within our organization, and coaching them and teaching them and mentoring them. I mean, it's been fun, and I enjoy doing this part of the job for sure.
Yeah.
Meetings, I can do without, but
Yeah.
definitely the people interaction, that's what makes us fun.
Well, I think that's a key thing that I like to share with folks at my agency, not ours anymore, but is to say we are all a piece of a puzzle, and we want the puzzle to, or a piece of the machinery, or whatever you want to call it. Um, no piece is more important, but we need all of them, right? And so you need your sergeants need you. We absolutely need you, line level. Like, you're the ones doing the policing, doing all the work, having all the interactions, carrying the mission, arresting the suspects. Like, this is all integral. However, your sergeant has a very, very critical role in that, right? Like, we all know, anyone that's been in the industry or even any industry, you can make or break a team with really terrible leadership,
Hmm.
or really great leadership. Sure, there are some people that are pretty self-driven and, little small unit. You might have that where, hey, we didn't need a cool sergeant. Okay, cool. You might be the unicorn, but recognize how much better things would be with an awesome sarge. Recognize how much better things would be with a healthy relationship with command staff, where they are doing their best to hear what you're saying. You're the boots on the ground. You see the things, and then you bring it up. And so, a nod to you, DC, in your role where you're behind a desk in all those meetings. I mean, those meetings are not fun, but I think we can all recognize that when we take a step back, what are those meetings for? Well, it's to get all these challenges, all these needs from above, below, laterally, this agency, that entity with the city, and try to build some progress towards all the things that we collectively need, right? Some of the we need is from the city. Some of the we need is from the public. Some of the we need is from the officers. And so combining all that, getting all these different people, personalities, and prerogatives, I mean, that's that's a bear. Government doesn't move quickly, but I like to think it can move steadily with the appropriate leadership.
Yep, absolutely. And it's one of those things that I think we have to remember is that, I look at my role as I'm here to serve my community, right? And then I'm also here to serve the chief. But more importantly, I'm here to serve my commanders and my lieutenants and my sergeants and my corporals and my officers because, uh, like you'd mentioned, they're the ones that are actually doing the heavy lifting now, right? My days of doing fun things on the street are long gone. And so my goal is to support them in the best ways I can. And so I'm fortunate here at my agency in that we have a pretty good up and down relationship in terms of how information gets pushed down, but
Hmm.
information also comes back up. So if something's not working, we can make the adjustments or we can change policy or this, that, the other. And then when we get input or feedback from our community members about the things that we're doing well, the things that they might want to see, we can also make those uh, kind of turns and pivots as well. And again, I'm fortunate that in my new city now, uh, community support for the police department is really, really good. We had a event over this past weekend, a Faith in Blue event, where
Hmm.
we went to a church, and it's not just the chief and I showing up, but we're having line level officers and line level sergeants coming out to this event as well, and community members interacting with all of us. And in some places, community members don't always wave with all five fingers, or
Hmm.
with they don't always wave with all five fingers. And so here they do, and we get hugs from kids, and it's like, whoa, this is amazing. But I remember being a new person in this city, in that this was built on our officers going out into the community and spending time with them and explaining the why we're doing something. And it's not always popular with community members, but at least here in our agency, we have moments where even on a call, we can take the time to explain why we're doing X, Y, and Z things. And those things 100% have paid off for us. Um, in terms of how we do business, how the police, how our community members see us and everything like that. And, for me, just remembering who I work for, and remembering that we have positive community support. And I remind our officers about that. It's not, I can't say it's always unicorns and rainbows, but, when we do have those down times, it's like, hey, we'll have those moments. We'll be able to get through this. And this is how we know, right? And this is why we're able to do these things. And officers are able to, yep, you know what? This is a good place to work. We enjoy working here. We enjoy working for our community. Enjoy working with our community. You can't say that you can't say that everywhere, right? So
Yeah.
definitely fortunate to have landed here for sure.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I want to take a moment and kind of go back to that notion of supportive community because, yeah, there are certain communities where it doesn't feel like that, where it's not everyone trying to buy your coffee and everyone waving all the time, everyone smiling all the time. And example I want to give is, where I currently work, and it's no surprise. I say that I work at Kent PD. There are a number of years where driving around, I'll take being a new officer, right? Being a new officer where I was coming into this new career and I felt like I needed to learn quickly and adapt to the street and adapt to these dangers, which is not, I'm not trying to mock any of that. Learning hypervigilance and toggling and being aware of all these signs of, pre-flight, pre-attack. These are super critical that a normal average person isn't attuned to. Maybe a sixth sense that they can't articulate, but now you're learning quickly the why and the factors that make you, have the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And so driving around, there would be often times where I'd make eye contact and then I would interpret something as like scorn. I would interpret like a furrowed brow, mean mugging, if you will. And yeah, there for sure were the kids and people that would flip me off. But then that became almost a reason as to why I didn't want to put myself out there. And it became me perceiving everyone hates us. Everyone hates me. They take it personally. They don't see the person. I'm just a badge and they hate the badge. So I'm just here. And so more and more, looking back, I didn't realize at the time, but more and more, I didn't want to smile at people driving around. I didn't want to wave. Because who wants to get rejected, right? Like even outside of the uniform, like who wants to wave at someone, just have you get stared at like that. Sometimes that happens at the grocery store now. I like move past someone, I kind of smile and say, hey, excuse me, sorry. And they just look at me with nothing. I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah. Are they having a bad
So
day? What's going on with them?
yeah, and so I say that because I kind of want first responders, cops specifically, to think about that. How, as I explain it, hopefully, if there is a part of you that's like, yeah, I've been there, hopefully you recognize still that doesn't mean that the majority of people out there hated me or hated cops, right? This is just a mixture of things. And what I'm trying to suggest is that if I'm going around purposely not smiling at people because I think everyone hates me, then I probably have my RBF has turned into like actually a frown. And now my brow is furrowed because I'm looking for danger. I'm looking for suspects. I'm looking for issues. And then so they just think that I'm mean mugging them. And so it's all to say, and sure, I spent some time in community engagement and recruiting, but I do think ultimately when we're honest with ourselves, truly honest with ourselves, we know that the majority of people do like the cops. And if they don't, then they tolerate the cops and they recognize we're necessary because that's the only way that you don't have utter chaos. And so that's what I put out there and kind of spin on what you were saying.
Yeah. And I think that for, newer kids getting into this line of work too, it's to kind of remember that, right? It's that we deal with a person on their worst day, but we don't deal with everybody, right? And so the hope is, and definitely, I spent enough time out at now your agency where, I've experienced those times, right? The Kent area, South King County is a very, very busy area, right? But I've realized just, as I started moving up through the ranks and I started interacting with different community members, it's not always dealing with a person, maybe that I'm arresting or is having a bad day or is in crisis or whatnot. But people do recognize the need for us, and people do want to have us around. And it's just a matter of we should be better at remembering that it's not everybody, right? We do have to still be careful when we go out in the world and are looking at our surroundings. And we have to maintain a level of vigilance, if you will.
Hmm.
But we can't make that like I guess there's a part of me where I go, we can't make that our entire life, right? Because we deal with a small percentage of people that causes a lot of pain and heartache for a lot of others. Well, the 90% of people that do need us around or do recognize us to be, you know, when we do act that way, that's how we continue to maintain those stereotypes, right? Oh, this cop just, they're just always mean mugging me. They're just always doing X, Y, and Z. And so I think in our line of work now, we do have to extend an olive branch, right? And if we're not, if that, when we reach a hand out and we don't get a hand back, that's okay. Maybe this isn't the right person. But we
Hmm.
have to kind of continue to maintain and try to build those bridges, if you will. Because I think the days of us just kind of what I would call like being an occupied force, that's not
Hmm.
what we do, right? We have to integrate with our community more and finding different ways and venues in which to do that. Because I would argue that, if you don't know, when you're cruising around in your beat, you know who or should know who the good guys are, who the person is that might be doing something up to no good. But you should also know who the good folks are, right? The folks that are just working the 9 to 5, the folks that are just trying to get to school. And yes, you might treat those folks different, but sometimes even a bad guy or a suspect one day could be a witness the next, could be a victim the next. And how you treat those people will go a long way. And that person or persons will remember how you treated them. Being able to, in our profession, we should be putting that hand out, right? And the hope is that that person will take that hand and will be able to engage in conversation, and maybe it'll be a good conversation. And if a person doesn't reach their hand out, we'll know that we can just move on. But I do believe that in our profession now, it is on us to do what we can to try and reach out to community members and show that we want to truly be a part of the community, not just be there to as kind of an occupying force.
Yeah, yeah, I fully agree. And there's a couple things there that, if we think about it, if we are just going around, with let's just say a stern face, we're not trying to put people off, but we're like, hey, I'm just neutral, net neutral. I deal with the stimulus I get. Well, we have to realize that we're probably fulfilling a lot of negative stereotypes, which is that these cops don't care. They're not here for me. They're here for the paycheck, or this, that, or the other. At the same time, if we want to defeat some of those negative stereotypes, if we want to prove it, and I think it's helpful to have that right balance of chip on your shoulder where you're like, no, this is going to motivate me to prove why or why not, right? You prove your doubters, whether they're the angry mob voices in the community, whether they're the toxic individuals in your own agency. Like, you prove otherwise through your effort, through your positive attitude, because technically that is yours. No one can take that away. And I think that, it might not be this generation, but maybe it's that generation's kids, right? Maybe they're like, hey, the police have been nothing but this, this, and this to me, your uncle, our community. But then if that next generation, all they see is, you know, some positive interactions, right? They see cops yelling at the person over there, but they're like, well, that was kind of scary, and I understand why they did that. They come in with a more open mind, and perhaps because you go to these community things, because you're not terrified of your agency being on social media, because that's where you meet people halfway these days a lot of times,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Just being open to it, you're more likely to get there. I love what you said about just putting the hand out and maybe someone doesn't take it, but you tried. And I think that there's a lot of merit to that. I can think of a decently recent complaint, because it was within the last year as a commander, where a mom was super concerned and super frustrated, and just like, that's very putting it lightly, about how her kid was treated on a call. And when I look at it, I absolutely understand why. And the reason why is because her kid was not the suspect. Very loosely fit the description, but we know oftentimes, like with the information you have, like, no judgment. I would have treated it the same way, because there were enough things with the vehicle, the build of the kid, the hair of the kid that made it in line so closely with the way the call came out. But the call was, basically Kent Station, populated area, midday, and there are threats with a gun. And so a bunch of cops roll up and draw down with rifles out at this teenager. And so if you're outside of that, if it's your kid, of course you'd be like, why, how the heck does this happen that my kid has like 4 or 5, ARs pointed at them? On the other hand, as a police officer, you recognize this thing is not that thing happens. Like these
Mm-hmm.
types of calls happen in our community. Right next door, there are legitimate shootings and homicides. So I'm glad in a lot of ways that officers showed up in the amount of force they did, the amount of people they showed up in case that was the suspect, in case things were going down. Now, it wasn't. Pretty quickly, the officers ascertained that, and then they went about their way, right?
Mm-hmm.
They did say sorry. They did kind of just move it along, but it's back to business. It's a busy agency, so they just get out of there, on to the next one. Whereas you would have loved if it was your kid, someone taking time and saying, "Hey, oh my gosh, like, so this is how it went down. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? By the way, like, do you need me to call somebody?"
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is an average kid would probably really benefit from that, right? Just a teenager that's driving a car and like, what is going on? Like, I have to admit that's probably very traumatic for most people. As we get talking and I hear her out and I offer some of these things, not as counterpoint, but to say, hey, I totally get it. Like, I see that. Like, I have a kid. She's not that old, but I can imagine some of these feelings. As the conversation went, it was nothing but you police, you police, you police. And after a while, I kind of took a leap of faith because I'd been so patient and there are certain things that we were building some commonality on. I'm like, you know what, ma'am, like, I hear you, and I hear that you've had nothing but these kind of impressions and these kinds of experiences with you and your family. I was like, but when you keep saying you police, and I've been doing my absolute best to be patient with you, is I feel like you're being a little prejudicial. And then I just kind of held my breath. I was like, oh, here it comes. They're gonna take my my star away because I'm on
There's going to be
probation.
another complaint coming. My boss is going
Yeah,
to get it.
she's like, no, you're absolutely right. She's like, you're absolutely right. She's like, we've been talking for quite a while, and you've been nothing but professional. I have to believe that if we were neighbors, we'd probably be cooking food together. We'd
Mm-hmm.
probably be friends. She's like,
Mm-hmm.
but you're a cop, and you're not my neighbor, so I'm gonna feel how I feel.
Right.
And I
But
said,
you
I
tried, right?
appreciate that. Yeah, and I said, I appreciate that. And I was like, that was really honest. Like, she's recognizing her extreme amount of bias that I felt like, in some weird way, I felt like that was a win.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
at the same time, I looked at the whole incident and I was like, I did not talk to a single officer about it because I did not see anything done wrong. And the last thing I wanted was for them to think that they were getting the scrutiny, right? That because it was unfounded. It wasn't anything that they did wrong, right? And so the
Right.
last thing I need to do is like pour this extra attention on. But that's an example that popped into my mind when we think about how we're coming off, or at least trying, but then recognizing, hey, they might not feel like a win. But even in that case, I felt like there's a pretty good win there.
Well, and you don't know, like the next encounter she has with an officer, where they may they might show some patience with her and everything like that.
Yeah.
Now the narrative is starting to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because people took the time to kind of go, okay, I hear you. I've never met you. I don't know. I recognize that you have this issue with this particular incident, and you just lay it out. And she was forthcoming enough to just kind of say, yeah, I'm not a fan of you guys. And that's okay too. I mean, at least you know where you would stand with that person. But the attempt was made. The officers on scene did what they could do, because I would imagine that sometimes you do have to jam off, right? You don't just have the time to kind of necessarily explain the why to everybody. And, that doesn't always get back to the parents.
Mm-hmm.
But just taking the time, if you have the time, is important, because sometimes that does prevent a complaint from coming down the road, or this interaction that you had with this person. Maybe the next interaction she has is going to be a positive one, and maybe that's how the narrative slowly starts to change, right? We can't expect things to happen overnight. It's just going to take some time. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's well put. And even on complaints, I've been thinking about this and talking to some of my guys about it, but I want to make sure that we recognize like what is a complaint and why do we care, right? And I think that short-sightedly, and I've been in this camp for let's just say the majority of my career, where I'm like, oh, we don't want complaints because they make us look bad, like, or because it causes the boss an issue. It's a headache that now it's going to be in my file or whatever. Like those are the potential results or symptoms of a complaint, but really, like, what is a complaint? And it's a significant enough disparity in expectations, right? Like it's ultimately like, hey, like this was so not what police should be, or this is not how I understand a call should go, or this is not how an investigation should be done. And so I'm complaining. I'm saying there's issue with this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can look at it like, okay, just like any successful relationship, you want expectations, you want expectations to align, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the last thing I want my buddy to think is that I'm gonna be there every single time he wants to hang out, right? Because that's not a fair expectation. That's gonna lead to resentment. That's gonna lead to all these things. So like healthy ones are where you communicate those things, and a complaint sometimes unreasonable, sure, but you have to actually take a moment and look at it before you can assess that. And a lot of times you could say, hey, these are opportunities for us to level this out, right? Expectations to delivery, customer service. Not like the customer's always right, because they're not. And our public is the customer. You're not always right, but unless you actually take a moment and you try to see what you can learn from that complaint, then you can see where you're at. And sometimes that might be, hey, we did everything right, but we're not, to your point earlier, right? We're not explaining it. And so that can be a huge opportunity. I think everyone who's listening, corporal to chief, that's fielded a complaint, or maybe in acting, right? Or just in your other jobs. How many times have you fielded a complaint? And it's not really a complaint. It was just a under or miscommunication and an opportunity to clarify. I've had so many complaints where at the end of the day, I'm like, hey, do you want someone to get in trouble? Is there something you're mad about? You're like, no, I wanted to know about this.
Yep.
And you told them, and you're like, well, that makes so much sense. Thank you so much for your time. Like they're saying thank you, almost like they're saying thank you for like the ticket where you didn't really expect it. You're like, oh, I thought
Mm-hmm.
this was just supposed to be a bad situation, a bad encounter. Like not at all. It could be based on how you come at it or how you respond to it.
Right. Yeah. 90% of the time, if there's an opportunity to explain something, people will go away from it going, hey, thanks. You know
Hmm.
what? I appreciate that. And it's not that you're looking for agreement. It's not looking to say that you're right or whatever the case might be. It's just that, hey, let me explain the process to you. Let me explain our policy to you. Let me explain why we, contacted your son, daughter, whatever the case might be. Once we're able to kind of get those out and talk with either it's the person that we're contacting, or it's a parent, or it's a grandparent, or it's an uncle or an auntie, they kind of go, oh, well, I thought you guys were all the same. Well, no, we're not all the same. There's some things that we do that are kind of similar, but you know, I can explain to you, or I have the time to explain to you our procedures, or why we're doing it, or why we're even contacting you in the first place, right? And again, it's not looking for everyone to go away like happy and high fiving. It's just to kind of it's to provide understanding, right? One of the things that I always hear is like, well, we don't know what you do. You know what? That's bad on our profession. We have not done a good enough job of explaining the things that we do, or why we do the things that
Hmm.
we do, right? And
Yeah.
again, I get it. We work in a dangerous line of work where we do have to be vigilant, right? But there are people that honestly want to back us. They want to support us, and we should be giving those people the information why. Even the folks that maybe don't necessarily want to hear from us, hey, this is the reasons why. I mean, we know that maybe you're going to turn it or twist it, but um, this is what my policy is. We have it online, or we have these procedures online. We have these things online. This is where you can go for the documentation. Not trying to take away anyone's experience or anything like that, but you're here working with me now, or you're here talking to me now, or we're in this situation now. Let's walk through it. If there's time, right?
Hmm.
That balance of trying to get the job done, because if if bullets are flying at your head and you're saying like, well, hey, let's talk about this a little bit, you've got a little bit of your priorities are going to be a little bit off. you do
Yeah.
have to recognize when the right time and place is to have those conversations.
Yeah, which is a perfect way to kind of segue because one, I was smirking because I was like, well, we don't do a good job explaining at times to folks, and maybe they just don't know how to get the info or how to ask for it. But we don't even do a good job explaining what we do or what we do to each other. Like,
Right.
how many units are like, what the heck do they do all day? Like, it's usually just this kind of contentious thing. But it's like, shoot, like when I was helping teach community academy after so many years at the PD, I was like, that's what those guys do, huh? Like they should put recruits through a community academy because a lot of those folks like come out knowing way more than like actual cops do
Oh
about
yeah.
the different like civilian roles and about that unit or like this cool case and case study or this tech. So that's all jokes aside, but even where you said, hey, like when you can have the conversation, and I've talked about this on the podcast and for sure other instances where sometimes you yell at somebody to get the F back. And
Hmm.
maybe depending on your department policies, maybe you don't say that, right? Best intent is maybe don't say the F bomb, but hey, back up. No, like we're not talking right now.
Right.
And so many times after the scene is safe, I've seen someone kind of in the background. Maybe it was a curious, resident neighbor. I'm like, hey, sorry I yelled at you. I don't like doing that. We had a call of this guy with a gun, and we were pretty sure that was the guy. It turns out he doesn't have a gun, but that's the guy. The
Hmm.
last thing I want is for you to walk up all curious and like,
Hey, what's going
there's
on?
rounds flying. Yeah, I was like,
Hmm.
this is stuff that's happened before. Sometimes errant rounds hit people, and just kind of leave it there. And I'm like, hey, that's why. And I already said, you start with sorry. So many times, like the extreme majority of times, people instantly de-escalate. You see their shoulders kind of sink. They're like, hey, I'm sorry.
Hmm.
I shouldn't have yelled back at you. You're the police. You're trying to do your job. I'm like, yeah, I am. And my job's to keep everyone safe. That's you included. Like,
Yep.
so thank you for having the convo, right? Thank you for the handshake.
Yep.
Sometimes it is that friendly and cordial, and then they're really like bygones, right?
Yeah.
And it goes back to earlier conversations, right? Like, unless you have that instance, then I was just the, D-word cop, and he's going to tell that story probably, right? And then
Hmm.
for everyone else that may be on the fence of like how cops are or how Kent cops are, well, I've just confirmed bias or I've, fulfilled a stereotype, not meaning to. I'm doing my job. I'm doing it, trying to do it safely, but when afforded the opportunity, what a potential there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, that's our job, right? We have to get to know our community. We have to get to know who's in it. It's not because I'm trying to spy on you and get you into trouble. It's just, this is how you start to get engage and learn, right?
Hmm.
Because the best street cops that I've seen um, are the folks that are out there and they're talking. Literally, they talk to everybody. Uh, Black, white, yellow, purple. It doesn't matter, male, female, whatever. They will literally talk your ear off. And sometimes I look at these cats and I kind of go, my God, do you ever get tired of talking? But uh, you have a couple folks at your agency that I remember when I was a newer cop in Des Moines, and there were one now retired, but one current officers with working with you guys. And I would interact with them out on the West Hill, and I kind of go, wow, they are entertaining. They're talking to everybody, and these people are talking back to them and providing them information. Holy
Hmm.
smokes, how do
Hmm.
they, for me as a newer cop, it's like, I want to be just like you, right?
Yeah.
Um, So shout out to Commander O'Reilly and shout out to Tom Reiner. I know
Hmm.
Reiner retired, but those guys
Yeah.
literally talking to everybody.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of key. I mean, they were able to do their job not only interacting well with community members, but interacting well with suspects as well. It
Yeah.
was amazing.
Yeah. No, it's great. And any conversation you have about community engagement and community relations, it generally just goes to like just giving a dang and talking to people. I love interview with BC Sanders. He's a gang expert down in the South, and his thing is, hey, community policing is getting out of your car and
Yep.
talking to people, right? Like if you talk to people, you show your care, you show that you're listening to what they have to say, whether it's this issue or hey, those guys are terrorizing the neighborhood. That's intel, right? And that's
Hmm.
building a relationship. And then you do what you can about it. They see that. And so it's the same thing, right? Like we think about in these meetings and these events, and those are awesome opportunities, right? At the same time, it's, you see meetings and events where people set them up at the high crime area, right? They
Mm-hmm.
at the apartments that are getting terrorized by a handful of units. And then you start talking about brass tacks. Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to action plan this? How are we going to get them kicked out, help management,
Mm-hmm.
and also put some emphasis on, right? So it's not just, the quote unquote directed patrol where we've seen this in past years, and it probably happens in certain places where, yeah, that's a high crime intersection. So I just stop anything that moves. And then a lot of ordinary people get kind of terrorized because we're just, kind of just hitting it with the indiscriminate pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I love where a lot of the conversation went. And as I introed, I was like, well, I really want to talk about all these leadership dynamics. And I think so much of this is that, right? I hope that people hear the leadership themes of like ownership and then patience. And, whether it's meeting halfway, we talk about community relations, right? But like, what about relations between rank, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's meet halfway. Let's have the conversation. Let's talk to each other. Let's recognize we're on the same team. We're unified in this purpose, and our little disagreements and squabbles and opinions and prerogatives, like those are all and need to be secondary. Like how we affect the issue. Sure, we can have a heated debate about how we affect this crime issue or this public
Mm-hmm.
safety issue. But the thing that matters is we're all here talking about it. We all really deeply, deeply care. That's
Mm-hmm.
why we get so heated. We're so impassioned. So that's my twist. If it's not obvious to people, the carryover of these themes and skills that we can work on in these intentions can absolutely, permeate within your agency, not just, oh, how do I improve relations with the, the folks in the community.
Right. Yeah. For me, an example of that is, so I get to my current agency and I'm the new kid, right? And I don't know anybody. And, some of the same things that I do when I deal with talking with community members, I just did with internally. Cops are cops, but you still have to show up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, what was it? We had, everyone goes through the tactics training, the patrol tactics training. And so I just attended the patrol tactics training, and officers were floored. They're like, this is amazing. I even got a standing ovation at one of them. And I'm looking around like,
Wow, look at
why
that.
is this such a
That's
big,
X SWAT. I bet that's X
yeah, it
SWAT
had
coming
to
out.
be, right?
VT dubs. I should have started with that for listeners. Got Steve
Um,
Cop here.
and so, I look at that situation, I go, this is, I deal with our officers, the folks that I don't know, the same way I would do with a community member that I don't know, right? Hey, this is who I am. This is what I've done. I've done it a way. Show me how you do it here, right? Show me how you do things here. Show me these different forms, right? I might be in a position where uh, I'm out there giving the commands and everything like that, but I don't know the history. I don't know the people. And whenever you land in a new environment, I think it is important to listen and to try and learn a little bit of the history. And then once you start making some of this inroads and you're showing up to these different things, I think that's what helps people respect you or at least listen to you, right? Um, because people now, years down the road, will still tell that story of, I remember when DC was out there at that training and this, that, and the other. It's like, man, but I haven't done anything for you guys since then, right? I've been hiding behind my desk doing this, going to meetings and stuff. And they're like, no, it was great. We know that you got an open door and that you'll actually listen to us. And as a leader, you need to be able to do that, right? Because if you just go there and you start pointing and directing and you don't have the history, you don't understand what you're pointing and directing to, there might be a very intrepid officer that's going to look at you and kind of go, we've been down this road,
Mm-hmm.
another leader that's not listening to us, another supervisor that doesn't know what's up. We're just going to keep doing and we're just going to go through our motions, and then that kills motivation for people. Ugh.
Yep.
And we can't have people that don't want to be at our organizations, right? That's another. It's tough enough to get people into the line, into police work. It's and we want people to be able to stay, and we want people to be able to make it to the end of their careers. And you got to engage, you got to participate, got to be curious and ask questions.
Yeah, I think that's such a thing, right? You're coming in as a senior leader from the outside, and they don't have that time. They don't have those memories. They don't have those calls,
Or
and they don't know
stories, or
you.
funny stories.
Yeah, good, bad, indifferently. They don't have any context, right? And
Right.
so any changes, although very well experienced, maybe rooted in a lot of experience and wisdom, they don't have the context that where you're coming from. And similarly, probably tempting for any new leader, even in the agency, right? Like you're going to a different unit or
Hmm.
it's a new rank. You have all these ideas and things you want to do, myself included. But what sounds strange probably is looking back at the different assignments I've had. If I had the time, which most of the time I did, I should have made a lot of notes on my intent and continued to plug away and keep learning. And
Hmm.
then probably half my notes would have been either dissolved, not relevant, or the other half, like if they still stood the test of time and, kind of being insulated now, I would say, okay, these are really legit because my outside critical eye was like, hey, why are we doing this? This makes no sense. And then
Hmm.
as I've been in the unit for weeks or months, I'm like, okay, really, I've been actively asking, and now it even makes less sense. So
Right.
let's make these changes so it doesn't feel so arbitrary. Um, and I do hear, the meeting people where they're at and showing up in these really iconic ways. I've talked to a lot of our guys about this where, we're paramilitary, and so showing up in those very, sometimes to us it feels like very little, but they make a big difference, right? Like showing up on a call or swinging by a traffic stop and you're the first backing officer. Like
Hmm.
that's such a big deal because that's where they're at. That's their day to day. They have to go to that training. You're popping into. That says a lot. A lot of administrators don't do that. A lot of
Hmm.
command staff don't do that. A lot of people in other support roles, units, if they can get by, they're noticed and they don't do that. And so it is just a return to remind those up and coming leaders or those developing leaders that are listening to this to sharpen themselves with new ideas. Yeah, it's don't think like too lofty. Like start small, start basic.
Yeah. Sometimes I think it's such a simple thing. Um, but there is I guess there is an art to leadership, right? There's an art to leadership, there's an art to management, and it's all in how you show up for folks. And we can read the books, we can read the textbooks, we can go and get different letters at the end of our name and everything like that. But you have to be there for your people. You have to show up for your people, and you have to do your best to understand your people as well, because you can do all these lofty things and want to try and get people to come up, but if they're not even on that same level, you already have a disconnect, right? And so finding ways of, all right, where are all of our folks at? Where do we need to move the needle at? Only comes with asking questions and listening. There will come a time where I can sit there and espouse my wisdom, but I have to be able to understand where my folks are at and understand how I can better help and serve them.
Yeah, I love that. I do want to ask you about your career because you did work at a couple different
Hmm.
agencies. As I did a little nod to your SWAT experience, you worked some different units. Can you give us kind of a quick dive into the different things you did at your different places, including our agency? So I'm going to say
Certainly.
ours because you're a part of it. You built some groundwork for where we are now. And I think everyone that comes through the door, whether it's 2 years or 20, right? I always say, thank you for your service and contributing positively. So I want to get that out of the way because if I didn't say it at our conclusion, I'd be like, oh man, I really wanted to say that as much as I've been joking and kind of prodding you.
Sure. Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. So I always tell people, and this is a part of my story, in that I've worked with, this is my fourth agency now. My first agency, I didn't make it through probation. I only lasted 11 months there. I tell people that I was a dummy. I didn't understand officer safety. So now, as a result of that, I harp on it. Um, because I just didn't have the awareness, and I didn't have the kind of street sense, if you will, to understand what it really meant to be a police officer. I understood what it meant uh, theory wise, but the practical aspect for me, it just wasn't there. So I resigned from that organization. I actually spent a little bit of time out of police work, and then I got picked up by the police corps about 2 years later. So I went back through the academy. So I went through 2 academies,
Yeah.
which maybe helps. I don't know. At least for me, I'm a slow learner. I like to say,
No.
but
So for those that don't know, Police Corps was an older, discontinued program in Washington. It was essentially a longer academy, right?
yep,
And
it was put on
other,
by the feds. We
yeah,
received a stipend. We didn't actually get hired by an agency until we graduated. So, but it was a fun program. I mean, we met a lot of people through that program. They were trying to, they wanted more community minded officers. That's what they were trying to shoot for. That was the goal of this program. But out of that, I got picked up by Des Moines. I was there for 5 years. I did patrol work. I was an FTO patrol. At that time, Des Moines was also looking at the PTO program. So we had the field training officer program, and then we had the patrol training officer program. So one model is based off of San Jose, the other model is based off of Reno. Folks that are super into police work, you guys can do your research on which one was which. And then had looked at potentially promoting, but one of my big things that I always wanted to do was I wanted to be on the SWAT team. My father was in the military. I have 2 brothers that were in the military. I did not go the military route. And for me, I grew up watching shows like SWAT and all the cop shows. And I always thought, man, that is some high level stuff.
mm-hmm.
So after about 5 years in Des Moines, unfortunately at that time, Des Moines was not a part of a SWAT team. I kept getting bugged by people in Kent because Kent and Des Moines shared a border, and made the jump over to Kent. And I was at Kent for 15 years. What did I do? So after a period of time, I was an FTO in Kent. I did eventually get onto the SWAT team. So I was on Valley SWAT for 5 years, and I was a recruiting officer. Once I was done with my SWAT gig, I got promoted to sergeant. I was sergeant for about 4 years, and as a sergeant, I oversaw canines, as you'd mentioned earlier, IT projects. I was the emergency management liaison. For those of you that are suffering through telestaff, you're welcome. I helped get that implemented.
Gee, thanks.
You're welcome. And what else did I do? Oh, I was a PIO, which is a public information officer for the department for many years, and eventually made it to the rank of commander, and there continued to just oversee other projects and such. And DEI was one of the bigger things that I was last doing before I left and came to my current agency. And now I kind of get a chance to oversee everything, I guess. I'm overseeing the project. We're building a new building right now. So that's one that I never realized 20 years ago I'd be participating in. So done a
Yeah.
little bit of this and that. Most of my time was spent in patrol. I always wanted to get into investigations, but it seemed like for me, I would encounter folks that had worked as detectives in their career, and for me, I started seeing the opportunity to move up as opposed to continue to, I guess, move laterally. So
Yeah.
majority of my time spent in what I would say patrol.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess I was our union president as well for a couple of years as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of hats. And I love the listeners to know that and couple that alongside not just your promotion, because some people, hey, if you don't know Bobby from Adam, promotions, they don't mean a lot to some people. But to hear the range of things, and I've spoken enough times about how legit Valley SWAT is, and it's not just like you learn this, especially in the recruiting game. But sometimes people have SWAT next to them. And it really just means like they went to like a training a year, like an extra training day a year. And I'm not trying to disparage those regions in the country. Like you get what you get, and maybe you have a rifle, and now you're SWAT because you have a little bit of additional training. And so, yeah, Valley SWAT, no joke. But I'm just trying to underline like the credibility. Field trainer, wearing all these hats at an officer level, not just this quick rise. And because I'm curious, I wanted to ask you earlier, but did you have any sense, when you talked about people kind of nudging you to promote. Uh, Earlier than that, did you have any sense of maybe someone else's narrative that, oh, college boy, you're going to promote that kind of thing? Because that's something that I encountered, and I always took it like it was a jab or something like that. And I didn't really want
Sure.
to. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to do all the cool things.
Yeah, they never. So in Des Moines, when we talked about it, the guys, I guess for whatever reason, I carried myself different, right? Um, I can never put a finger on what it was. Like I didn't try and act like I was better than anybody else because the crew that I worked with, oh Lord, they were a cast of characters and they were awesome. I learned so much from them. And I just wanted to learn how to do the job. But for whatever reason, however I conducted myself when we were either dealing with victims or witnesses or suspects, um, it wasn't just the line officers, it was my supervisors as well saying, hey, you need to look into becoming a sergeant. You could be a police chief somewhere. And, for someone to say that when I only had, 2 years on at that point in time, it's like, what are you talking about? I mean, people knew that I'd gone to college. I did get, I have a bachelor's degree. And then later on, I went back and got my master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
But, people knew that I was a college kid, but they didn't use it against me, I guess. And I know, as you came up, hearing some of the things, kind of like, why are you guys doing that? I mean, people see the world differently through different experiences. It's not a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone just comes from the streets straight into patrol. We all got here from different places. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's just different now. But at the time, it certainly felt like a mixture. I think that some people are like, oh, college boy, big words in your report, right? And it was, in jest, but at the same time, when I think about putting that chip on your shoulder, I certainly had a chip on my shoulder, which is to
mhm.
say, cool, I'm not just good at writing reports. And that's where I leaned into wanting to do something as iconic as Canine. Like I
Oh
wanted to
yeah.
prove myself, and I wanted to prove it to myself that I could be like a legit street cop and do like legit street cop things.
hmm
Um, yeah, no, I appreciate sharing that, and I also appreciate you sharing about how it was a tough road at the beginning, right? Like it,
hmm
it didn't pan out; it wasn't just smooth sailing, and I think that that's important to one. I think it's very valuable for people listening. There's a lot of people that want to be a cop that listen in on this and saying, "Hey, like just because one road ends doesn't mean you can't pick yourself up and just put your effort fully into that thing again, and just regroup. And we all have things that we put in for that don't pan out, or even a case that we're pretty sure we're going to lock this down, get the confession, everything right, and then maybe we do and it doesn't get filed, right?
hmm
That's super disheartening. We're gonna have these misses, these non-captures, these guys that get away, and what do we do? And that's really what resilience is, right? How do you pick yourself back up? Have you
And it,
reflected on that when you look at your whole journey and, having spanned a lot of lateral positions, but also risen to a very prominent and a very impressive rank?
right, yeah, I think resilience is a big deal in this line of work, right? And I know we focus on a lot of wellness these days and everything like that, but you will experience in this line of work a lot of different obstacles. And it's not going to be somebody's not necessarily going to show you this paved path of, hey, you do these things and 100% of the time you're going to get to where you want to go, right? That's just not life. But I do know that for me, as I reflect upon it now, those experiences where maybe I didn't succeed at something caused me to have to either shift focus or think about achieving that goal in a different way. Um, Maybe it's more time out the range because my firearms, and I'll tell people I wasn't the greatest firearms person, but reps at the range, reps with this infamous character, Sergeant Bill Blowers, just
Hmm.
going over those, and spending time and being dedicated to the craft will help. You need a little bit of luck, right? Sometimes there's a little bit of luck, but if you put in the effort, you put in the time, you ask questions, you show humility, right? Like you know what, didn't know that one, or you know what, I goofed up on that one, my bad. Um, and you see what the goal is. Like my goal has always been, well, I wanted to be a police officer. Where that came from, I don't know, but I know when I got a taste of it at that first agency, oh, that's like, yeah, I can do this job. I need to fix the things I need to fix. And so how I did that was by going back to the previous FTOs I worked with. They were willing to talk to me about my issues, and they were willing to give me some pointers about what I needed to do to be a better person. And I think at the end of the day, if you're taking those steps to try and be a better person, um, you're just trying to on a daily basis, right? Sometimes it's mentally, sometimes it's physically. Um, you have to have that resilience. You have to have that kind of, I don't know if it's a type of drive, but I'm okay with failing and I'm okay with learning, right? Part of learning is, oh, I made a mistake. I need to shift fire. Because if you just get to a point and you've never had struggle or you've never had anything go wrong, when things do start to go sideways, and in this line of work, things can go sideways in a moment, you have to have kind of that thought process of, all right, this didn't work. I need to do something different. And you need to do it quick, right? You can't just sit there and keep thinking about, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Hey, where's my Sarge? Where's my LT? Where's my commander? You're going to have to do it on your own, on your feet. You got to think about it lickety split. So have a plan of some type going in, but just know that plan could change in a moment and you'll have to shift fire or you have to shift your focus. But resiliency is a big deal. I think that is one of the things that has helped keep me in this line of work, because there's just so many good people and there's so many good things about this profession that I don't think people even realize, right? It's I sometimes think that it's a shame that those of us that have been able to get into it, whether it's a year or it's 40, have the opportunity to experience a lot of these things. Do we see a lot of bad things? Absolutely. Um, but I think nowadays there's so much more where we're able to talk about those issues. We're able to talk about, hey, yes, I'm going to therapy. Hey, we're talking about these different things in our line of work about the goods and the bads that we see. That I think slowly, at least my hope is that slowly people will understand that it's okay to show those points of weakness. It's okay to say, "Hey, I need help," um, because that is what helps build your resiliency and helps keep you moving on, not only in profession but in life as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think that, I mean, you hit it when you said humility, right? I think that that early misstep or failure, whatever you want to call it, right? It made you humble and it made you circle back and realize like what your goal was, what your purpose was, and what is a life if it's not purpose driven. And so even earlier when you're talking about how there was this, you can't put your finger on it, you're not quite sure what it is, why your peers and why your Sarge was saying, hey, Bobby, you should think about promoting. And I can picture it from my stance as you coming in as an experienced officer, or I suppose being an experienced officer when I came in and being a field training officer. But it was that I felt you were a pretty stern FTO. I mean, I didn't have you as a student, but that was the aura, right? But it was this consummate professional. And I think that that's something that most everyone that's worked alongside you or, kind of seen you from the periphery would agree is like you're just professional and you focused on business and you focused on relationships, but you did it in such a way that didn't tarnish anything. It didn't have something where that was subject to scrutiny because you wanted to meet people halfway and you wanted to balance your approach, like way before your admin, way before all that, but just, hey, here's the thing. I'm going to be objective and I'm going to try to get the thing done and also try to consider all these other things. And so I think that, when I think about like your brand or maybe what made you successful in that venture and continued success. And truly, I feel like you've relaxed as you promoted. At least maybe that's just the type of interactions we have now because it's a lot more casual. But I think that's good, and I think that inspires a lot of hope for me being somewhat mid-career, and certainly if it's for me, then it's going to be for others to hear these anecdotes and these stories and how even through all the stress and all the traumatic situations, uh, there is a bright light, down the tunnel, as it were.
Oh, absolutely. And I think over the years, even I know that my personality has, and I've changed my approach in how I deal with things, right? Early on in my career where it's like, hey, I want these, newer officers to understand that this job is important and, we see some terrible things and we're going to do some, things where we're taking away people's rights and so on and so forth. It's a very serious mantle that we carry, right? We have a role in general society that no other persons have or can experience. And so a part of the sternness, a part of the professionalism at that point in time was like, hey, this is a serious job. You got to know, how to do it. You got to be technically proficient. Um, I'm reminded by, one of my former student officers, and they're like, they said the light bulb came on to them when I got, after a call, they had done something not too well. And, this person was a sports guy. And again, trying to meet people where they're at. Right. So I jump in the passenger seat and I look at this officer and I go, hey, pull your head out of your behind and do this job like I know you can do this job. Because at that point in time, I want to say it was like phase 3. So
Mm.
they're doing the majority of the work anyways. They had
Yeah.
already done, they had gone on a couple calls. So it wasn't like it was a unusual, oh my gosh, there's all these. It's like, this is like a similar type call that you're going to go to. You know how to deal with it. You know how to answer it. And that person always relays this story to me. And I go, well, I'm glad that I was able to make an impact. But, for that person, they turned it around. Like literally
Mm.
the next shift, the next day, um, focused, back doing, responded to the call. We responded to a similar type call the next day, even the next week, knew the questions to ask, was able to properly make an arrest. It's like, all right, mission accomplished. You just need to know. And I told this person because they liked sports, it's like a switch, right? You got to flip it on, you got to flip it off. So you can't just kind of lollygag your way into something. You got to kind of be intentional about some of the things that you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, but then as I had promoted up, through the ranks, I kind of go, now part of my job is I need to, knowing how tough the job is, I need to try and keep it light for my officers, right? So I don't want to be, you know, professional and, this kind of straight dude all the time. I do have to kind of let my hair down a little bit just to kind of show, hey, I do have a little bit of a personality and this job is tough enough. I don't want me as an administrator for you to kind of go, oh, I don't want to be, I don't want to be in the office. I don't want to, I just, let me find another department that, I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I want this environment to be a safe place for people that we can have our arguments behind closed doors. We can have our laughs behind closed doors. But then when we're out there on the street, we're able to be professional. We're able to do our job. We can answer questions. We can give people whys. And a lot of it starts internally. And if I'm not demonstrating that to my officers, they're not going to be able to demonstrate that or even apply that when they're dealing with citizens. They're just going to be professional. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. Carry on. And, I recognize over the year that things will change. And in different roles, you may have to do things and look at things a little bit differently. The one thing that I always have been consistent on, though, is a sense of optimism. In this job, sometimes it seems like it's dark and there's no, we get new legislation put on us and there's always this new policy that comes down the pipe. But if you can find that sense of optimism, like, hey, we are helping people and community members do want us around and they do need us, holding on to that, knowing that I am making a difference has been really helpful as I've moved up through the ranks.
Yeah. Those are really good examples. One's just the curt kind of direct, like, hey, and you didn't say pull your head out of you didn't say behind, did you? You don't have to answer
Probably
that.
not.
You don't have to answer that. Uh, yeah. So when you think about like, the tone of today versus like, no, sometimes you just have to have that, one-on-one direct conversation, which is that, hey, that pep talk, right? That kind of locker room thing that turns around the course of the game. And that's very relevant for trainers and leaders, even peer leaders, right? To nudge the guy or gal next to you and say, hey, like, we got this. Let's go.
Yep. Yep.
But also, what we spoke about earlier, which is that, hey, let's take a moment. It's all right. Like, that was a really crappy call.
Yep.
I feel it. And just open that up, right? And then, you're talking about kind of loosening up. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, I'll take full credit for coining amongst the canines, like, hey, Sarge wants to talk to us. And me being like, is it Bobby or is it Robert? And that is stood the test of time. As like Kalir will bring up sometimes and be like, hey, man, it's Bobby
Robert today. Yeah.
Or it's Bobby. It's okay. We're like, oh, thank God. Well, sir, DC, thank you so much for your time. We covered so much. I appreciate you sharing your insight and wisdom. You are, we talked about humility just a little bit ago. You are a humble guy. As before we started recording, you're like, well, I don't really know what I could offer, but I'll do my best. Which is, that's kind of credence to how you show up the way you do and how it's effective. So again, thank you so much for your time and sharing with us.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be on, and I appreciate your time and the work that you're doing with Blue Grit Radio and everything. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.